As warnings escalate over the perils the planet faces, can the world unite and agree a deal? Will Doha deliver? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Nick Clark and welcome to this special edition of Inside Story. So, the annual UN bandwagon has rolled into town. At stake, the necessity to chart a way forward in tackling climate change. But developing and developed nations, well, they're at loggerheads. And the stated urgent need for action is being met with political stalling. Tarek Bazley looks now at the core issues at the very heart of this conference.
The symptoms of a warmer world are already with us. Stronger storms, heavier floods and hotter, longer heat waves. The changes are disrupting plants and animals, and with them millions of people. At the top of the agenda at the Doha climate talks, trying to find a way to extend the Kyoto Protocol. It's due to run out at the end of this year, and if it does, so too will the commitments of a number of developed countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Getting an agreement on how to extend the treaty and under what terms has been slow work.
We are disappointed, however, that the developed countries are in the process of looking at low ambition levels under the second commitment period. We call on them to raise their ambition consistent with what is required by science and the principles of the Convention.
Delegates have also been working on what will replace the Kyoto Protocol. Under Kyoto, only some developed countries made binding commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's hoped a new treaty will include binding commitments from all countries, especially India and China, the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide. Under Kyoto, China was not obliged to limit its greenhouse gas emissions, but it has promised to reduce what it calls carbon intensity, the amount of carbon dioxide produced for each unit of economic growth. There's no dispute China is the king of carbon dioxide emissions, but it's using these talks to make the case for a different way of calculating them. Carbon dioxide can remain in the environment for centuries, and that's why China says historical emissions are significant and must be factored, and those countries who emitted the most in the past must be the ones who now make the greatest cuts. Cumulative carbon dioxide emissions, calculated from 1850 to 2007, put the United States well out in front. During that period, it produced 3 times as much CO2 as any other country. Also on the agenda, how to find money for the newly created Green Climate Fund. It's supposed to oversee the funding of aid to help poor countries deal with climate change, but exactly where it will find what's hoped to be $100 billion a year by 2020 is unclear.
So it's very much a matter, very much a challenge of designing that Green Climate Fund in a way that is seen as attractive to the developing countries that will draw resources from it, also attractive to the donor community, which has to provide significant amounts of grant money. But finally, and perhaps most significantly, the Green Climate Fund needs to be a suitable vehicle for the private sector.
More action! More action!
Holding a rare public protest along Doha's waterfront, activists at the UN talks hoped for more urgency. They say the outcome of COP18 is a test for the world's leaders to demonstrate to their own people, if not the whole world, that they're serious about tackling climate change. Tarek Bazley for Inside Story.
So here in the Convention Centre, let me introduce our guests I'm very pleased to say have joined us. First of all, we have Kumi Naidu, Executive Director of Greenpeace International, then Wael Hamadan, Director of the Climate Action Network, and finally Mohammed Jazim Al-Meselmani, who's Chairman of the Qatar Institute of Directors and a climate change negotiator for 10 years. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. The first question I'd just like to get out of the way, just this business of these climate change conferences, these almost like jamborees, aren't they? 17,000 delegates come in. They always run over. They're incredibly expensive to put on. What's the point?
Well, firstly, for your viewers who don't know what COP is, because when it came to my city last year in COP17, it was called, my aunt was saying, is this a convention of police people? COP is the conference of the parties. These are all the countries that have signed up recognizing that we have to take action. Sadly, over 20 years, we have not seen the COP delivering what the science and what the events on the ground are saying we need delivered. But I think when we make an analysis of why things work or don't work here, at the end of the day, however good the UN is and however good the presidency of the country that's hosting it, the real issue is there has to be political will in the different nations that are parties to the convention in terms of what mandates they come. So sadly, they're not coming with the mandates with the right ambition.
I understand that, but isn't it the process that's dysfunctional?
No, it's not the process, definitely. The process is fine. If you look now in the past 20 years, what has delivered more climate action? This process has delivered more than anything else. As Kumi is saying, this process captures the political will. So countries come here and this process tries to find what common political will exists and it captures it. But if the political will is low, then what can it capture is what exists. The work mainly is in capitals changing the political will there and raising ambition, especially in developed countries. And if you look at those who want to stop ambition, such as coal and oil companies, they focus their action in the capitals to reduce political will because they know if they stop it there, such as in the United States, they know that this process will not be able to capture much.
But tell me one thing, perhaps you can help here, Mohammed. Why do they always overrun? Why do they always go on 24 hours, 48 hours longer than they should? After 2 weeks.
It's become a cultural for, I've been in the negotiation for about more than 10 years. We start the plate, in the beginning with ideas and then it transforms to decisions. And then we wait for the political, our, senior people, presidents or ministers to come and endorse what we've been working through the days.
So, and that's what's been going on the last 3 or 4 days.
So, what we've prepared by technical people now is in front of the ministers to take political decisions. So it is always hard to take political decisions, This is the thing,
Well, we've got 3 main strands of attack here. One, extending Kyoto. The second one is the roadmap to a new accord in 2015 with all developing and developed nations agreeing. And the third is finance. Let's talk about Kyoto first of all. Well, if we could come to you first. Looking to renew it, it expires in 3 weeks' time. Does it really have any value at all when it only covers 15% of emissions?
First, let me say there's a fourth strand that is very important because the deal 2015 talks about what we need to do after 2020.
Right.
But there's a fourth strand that talks about action before 2020, which is very important because if we don't close the gap in ambition in reducing carbon emissions between now and 2020, we will not reach our politically agreed target of 2 degrees, staying below 2 degrees temperature rise. So this is a very important element that should come out of Doha, and there are 4 important strands. Going to the Kyoto Protocol, the preservation of Kyoto Protocol has many value, a lot of value more than which countries are involved and which are taking actions. It is now the only instrument, legally binding instrument, that has rules and mechanisms that ensure accountability and ensures that we're assessing how much we're doing. The rest of the instruments existing are first not legally binding. They are decisions, they are not protocols. Protocols require ratification in capitals. The rest are decisions that are agreed here, and they don't include any mechanism that ensures that we are accounting for each emission that's happening out there.
But you say that it's legally binding, but that was knocked into a cocked hat by Canada at the end of 2011, who just pulled out of Kyoto because they said it was too expensive, it was going to cost them $14 billion. So not really legally binding, is it?
Well, pulling out is an option, but the minute you pull out, you get a lot of criticism. Canada is now recognized for the 4th year in a row as one of the worst, if not the worst, climate inactive country. And there's a lot of pressure. We've seen this year a huge demonstration of tens of thousands of people in the streets of Canada because of their actions on climate change. Yes, unfortunately, the existing system allows countries to pull out whenever they want. It's in almost every treaty this exists, but we hope that this will give a message to civil society to act and put pressure on countries like Canada.
There is another value as well, in addition to what Val just said, and that is the world must not forget the history of this problem. And Kyoto helps us to actually remember that the problem of carbon accumulation has gone on for 2 centuries, that the rich nations actually they built the economies on burning of fossil fuels, and therefore this principle of common and differentiated responsibility, that is the language of this climate convention, has to be maintained, because sadly in the public conversation, in the private negotiations here, developed countries want to sort of negate and dehistorify the problem and say, well, everybody has to be treated exactly the same way. And developing countries, of course, are constantly saying, hang on a minute, you folks built your economies on this basis, now you're denying it to us, we are still poor countries, and therefore, that's not right. And that's something that's really important that people should remember, and Kyoto Protocol actually is the sort of placeholder, the memory to actually say, let's understand there's different responsibilities.
But not everybody agrees with it, as we saw with Canada's action, and also New Zealand, Russia, Japan not part of it.
And of course, the United States never signed in the first place.
Never signed it in the first place. So it still has a big question mark, and then it doesn't involve the developing nations. So maybe we should just forget it and just move on to a roadmap to 2015, which involves both developed and developing nations.
Well, Nick, it took 8 years for Kyoto to come in force. I mean, from 1997 up to 2004, when Russia ratified, then it became enforced. So, what I'm afraid of, walking from Doha with Kyoto finished on 31st of December, and with the death certificate of Kyoto. Because if we walk out without legally binding agreement, KB2, I mean, Russia and other countries like Japan, they denying to come up to KB2. And if they walk out of Kyoto, then next year we have nothing really, what they call legally binding agreement. I mean, extending Kyoto, although it could be adopted here, but they have to go to their capital to endorse it. And that might take years. As I said, it took 8 years for Russia to come up with the ratification. And so, this is a very difficult situation for Kyoto now.
Okay, well, Kyoto's one thing. 2015, the roadmap to 2015 for implementation in the year 2020 is another, which again brings in your point about, it's going to be too late, isn't it? Are we anywhere close to getting that roadmap underway?
First, to get this roadmap, to get developed and developing countries to be equally treated in terms of type of commitment, not the amount of commitment. Of course, the amount of commitment should be shared fairly. Equitable sharing of effort is important. So yes, everyone's going to be under this new agreement, but will the developing countries sign on such a deal in 2015? And this will not happen unless we get the fair share distributed, and this is demonstrated in Kyoto. So actually, agreeing on Kyoto will help having a work program that achieves an agreement in 2015. Developed countries need to raise their ambition. They need to close the ambition gap between now and 2020, and by 2015, when you build the trust between developed and developing, because Copenhagen failed, there was a huge gap of trust between developed and developing, and you need to close it. And this only happens if developed say, okay, we're taking now leadership, we're raising our ambition, we're providing the 100 billion we promised by 2020, we're showing what we're going to do. Then developing countries in 2015 will say yes.
That's a wish list, though, isn't it? That's a wish list. Are we really going to see that kind of action from developed countries?
Well, sadly, a sobering point here is to just remember what the science says. Because we had a Bali roadmap from 2007, which over 2 years, part of what we were trying to do in Copenhagen in 2009 was to actually get a fair, ambitious and legally binding treaty, because the science is saying consistently that emissions should peak by 2015 and start coming down. So that's a very sobering point, because we have to understand that the science and what's happening on the ground in terms of extreme weather events is completely out of sync with the politics of the negotiations.
Right. And so how do you narrow that gap? How do you bridge that divide?
I think we can only narrow that gap, not in terms of what happens in the halls here. It has to be complemented by robust citizen pressure And we have to build the biggest ever social movement that the world has ever seen, because the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is more important than every other struggle for justice we've had combined, because what we're fighting for here is the survival of humanity as we know it. So we cannot put all our faith in the negotiation process. The negotiators have to be, and governments have to be pressurized. And I think young people across the world, what we see in our work, are actually way ahead of politicians. Even here in the Arab world, I've been so impressed by the Arab Youth Coalition, the way they are organizing and so on. We have to ensure that we don't bank on a process that has delivered, but delivered not to the extent that the science and the reality on the ground tells us we need to deliver.
Isn't it very hard for any politician, apart from the most forward-thinking one and the one who doesn't worry about his own career too much, to really think about the future in the way that the politicians here need to make something happen?
Well, you know, what happened in Durban is just politics. You know, they deferred the new protocol or the new commitment from 2012 to 2015. This is purely political, based on what they call economics, you know, problems and, you know, financial crisis and everything. So, you know, politics is just, you know, playing the role of the whole thing. You know, I mean, just it's politics.
It was ever that.
Let me comment on that. Every politician is a family guy. This is one of the criteria to show that you're a politician. Every politician has kids. And they have to understand that their kids, no matter how much money they have in the bank, their kids will not have the same future, enjoy the same life that we have now if we don't solve this problem. And I'm sure they should care about their kids more than their career. I think they care about their career because they want to have a nice future for their family. But if we don't solve this problem, human civilization is going down the drain. And that's why I believe there is hope.
I hear what you're saying there, but
actually,
we've been saying that for 20 years, haven't we? And here we are, you know, still at loggerheads.
Now we're feeling the gap is so near. 20 years ago, we had 20 years.
Okay. Could we?
Well, a leader of a German think tank put it very well. He said, whichever your values frame is, climate change is a catastrophe. Because if you're a capitalist, you should not kill your customers. Right? And climate change is going to kill your customers. If you're a socialist, you shouldn't kill your comrades. And if you're a humanist, you shouldn't kill your children. Because unless we understand there's a big issue here of intergenerational solidarity that is in question, that how we nurture and what we do now, future generations are going to judge us extremely harshly. I mean, right now, we will be judged extremely harshly for the failure to act when the evidence was crystal clear. I mean, 20 years ago, you could say, well, maybe the science was not so clear, etc. Now, with the science, as well as a combination of devastating climate impacts. I mean, take the United States, one of the biggest culprits. We've got the hottest temperatures ever recorded, 80% of the country in drought as we sit here. And of course, Hurricane Sandy was a very visual reminder. So our politicians have to decide now whether they're going to, you know, listen to the powerful fossil fuel lobbyists who actually control their decision making, or whether in fact they're going to take a long-term view. Because many reports have said every month, every quarter, every year we delay taking action. The costs, every opportunity we lose, the costs in human life, infrastructure and livelihoods is growing exponentially.
But there is also a cost to fight it, isn't there? And we're talking about $100 billion a year from 2020. Can't you see where the politicians are coming from, given all the austerity measures that are taking place in their home countries? Where are they going to find that kind of money?
I think the money is available, but there is no will to go along. Yeah. I mean, the money...
Where is it available from? Hasn't it dried up from the banks?
Hurricane Sandy costs around 60 billion. This is one country. Asking 100 billion to avoid such economical catastrophes from developed countries, all developed countries, is not much. If the US is going to pay 60 billion to this catastrophe, in 5 years they're going to pay 200 billion for such catastrophes, and so on and so on. The number is going to increase. The impact on the economy from climate change is much higher from the amount to solve it. So, but
it does mean that for money on that sort of scale means directing it from other funding projects, doesn't it?
Well,
it's dried up from the banks, it's dried up from utilities companies.
Emission trading by itself could have that kind of money every year. I mean, carbon trading, the market have reached, I think, 2010, almost $120 billion of trading. I mean, that kind of money could be raised, you know. I mean, because the U.S. out of Kyoto, I mean, the market lost almost, you know, 70% of the value because U.S. didn't join the Kyoto Protocol.
It does come down to political will, right? Because if, as others have said, if the climate was a bank, we would have saved it a long time ago. The CIA and the Pentagon themselves in 2003 said to President Bush, in the coming decades, the biggest threat to safety, security, and stability will not come from terrorism or conventional threats, but will come from the impacts of climate change, and we are seeing it in my continent, Africa, already. So if you look at the amount of money going into military expenditure, which is completely indefensible, a fraction of that money, right? A small fraction of that money will completely generate the money, and even if the military and the intelligence community are telling us that actually take that money, put it in climate, because actually that is what will actually create a more safer world, then that makes sense to do. But our politicians do not have the political will to act with the urgency that the situation
Actually, the money spent on marching bands in the US military is more than what developing countries are asking into the adaptation. This goes only into musical bands in the military, and that's enough if they just divert it to adaptation.
It's amazing the facts you learn here on Inside Story. But again, we come back to this business, as Kumi was saying, of political will. But how do you encourage that political will? How do you massage it forward, if you like?
Well, you know, I hope that we come out with a work, you know, what they call work plan for the Durban platform. I mean, that is needed now. You know, we have to come out from here with that work plan. I think we need to do something about the long-term commitment. I mean, they will hopefully extend the working group for long-term, so that will could go up to 2015, and at least you have some kind of continuous process. You know, operationalize the CDM, all these mechanisms.
All these mechanisms,
to be continued. I mean, you know, that has to be there, you know, on this transition period. You know?
All right, we're just running out of time, but well, just finally from you and then from you, Kumi, where do you find your optimism?
My optimism, I think that leadership, this is what we've learned in social movement, leadership comes from everywhere, from anywhere. So it doesn't only have to come from developed. Every country has a responsibility. Actually, the convention principle of CBDR is CBDR-RC, common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, i.e. everyone is capable, should do something, and we hope leadership comes from around the world, especially from this region, from Qatar and the other Arab countries who have the capability to do a lot.
Do you think we've had the leadership we should have had here?
Well, I think we would hope that they would commit to actions, and it's not too late. Actually, we're hearing hopefully that they're going to be announcing actions, but we're at the last hour, so we hope they do it today as fast as possible, because it will help actually the outcome here.
Okay, Kumi, last word.
My optimism comes from the fact that we can turn the crisis of climate change into an opportunity. That in fact, if we invest seriously in renewable technologies, energy efficiency, move in the direction of a progressive green economy, we can have a double win for the planet. We can, on the one hand, bring down emissions and avert catastrophic climate change, but if we made those investments in the proper way, we can actually breathe new lives to failing economies. We can generate millions of more green, decent jobs, and study after study is showing that. Our politicians must now have the guts to stand up to the oil, coal, and gas companies that are holding us back and move us in that direction and generate a completely revolutionary new industry that can assist with climate change, but also give people decent jobs and dignity in a more equitable world in the future.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. It's good to talk about it. We need more time, not perhaps 2 weeks like this conference has, but we certainly need more time now. But it's very good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. So, Kumi Naidu, Executive Director of Greenpeace International, thank you. And well, Hamedin, Director of Climate Action Network, and Mohammed Jazim Al-Meselmani, we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. And that's just about it from us here at Inside Story. Don't forget any comments or suggestions, just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, and our guests, it's goodbye.